Hello massage nerds. Today I'm going to bring you the 6 muscles that move the scapula. The Levator Scapulae, Rhomboid Minor, Major, Trapezius, the Serratus, and the Pec Minor. So before I get into the muscles, I want to remind you guys, how to look for how the fibers go, because that's going to tell you how the muscle moves. So these fibers, are going this way, a little diagonal, so they're going to pull down. These are across, and these are a little bit more, lateral here and to the occipital ridge. So if you look at how the fibers go, it tells you how the muscle moves, and I also want to touch a little bit on the origin and the insertion, because a lot of the students have a difficult time remembering where the origin and where the insertion is. So remember that the origin is always closest to the midline. It's closest to the heart. So you can think of Hoji. This is how I teach it. Hoji, the H is for heart. What part of the muscle is closest to your heart? That will be the origin. Then the J is for the joint that it crosses, because remember, in order for a muscle to move a bone, it has to cross that the bone. So it crosses and is joined by the ligament. So it has to cross a joint. And then the furthest one is the insertion. So let's say you have 2 points right here on the rhomboids. One is the origin, one's the insertion. How can you tell? Well, you can tell that these fibers, this tendon attachment is closest to the heart. So this is going to be the origin. And the one that's the furthest one will be the insertion, because the insertions are the ones that move towards the origin. That's how movement goes. From the insertion, and moves. These fibers are anchored right here. They're anchored and they're being stable, holding this joint stable so that the insertion can move towards the origin. So remember Hoji, H-O-J-I. H is what part of the muscle is closest to the heart. O, that will be the origin. And then J for the joint that it crosses, and I will be the most distal, and that's usually the insertion. About 90% of the time, you can apply Hoji. So let's start with the muscles, and let's start with the rhomboids, which if we had drawn them on both sides, they look like a little Christmas tree. So you've got the Rhomboid Minor, Rhomboid Major, and we call them rhomboids because a lot of times the fibers intertwine right here and it becomes like one muscle. So the originates from C1, and remember C1 is the most protuberant of the cervicals. So that's C1 and then T1. So it's got two origins, and it inserts right here, right at the medial part of the scapula, below the spine of the scapula. So the spine of the scapula is about right here. So they insert below, right here on the medial side of the scapula. And then the Rhomboid Major originates from T2 to T5, and it inserts right here on the medial part. And these muscles, they retract. I'm going to show you the movements here a little bit at the end. So now let's move to the Levator Scapula. Levator Scapulae originates from the transverse processes of C1, 2, 3, and 4. So the transverse processes, and then they insert right here on the superior medial part of the scapula. And this muscle has like a little torque right here. So it's got like a little twist. So make sure that when you're working it, that if you feel a little bump right there, you don't really try to work it out, because it's part of the way the muscle fibers go. It's a twisting muscle here. Now we have the trapezius. The trapezius has 3 parts: the lower fibers, the medial fibers, and the upper fibers. And they all work different. This is a muscle that can be antagonistic unto itself. And what that means, that when this is the agonist or doing the primary movement of pulling down, then the upper fibers have to relax and get lengthy. So these would be the antagonist. And it can reverse itself. If this is for elevation, the upper fibers can be used for elevation, then these have to relax and lengthen. So that's why it can become antagonistic to itself, because it works as 3 separate muscles but it is one. And this one originates at the nuchal line, the superior nuchal line, and from T1 to T12. Okay, these are the origins. All here are the origins. Like I said, origins are closest to the midline, closest to the heart. They anchor the muscle here, and then the insertion, it doesn't cover all the scapula. It covers from the spine of the scapula, and it inserts on the anterior part, on the third part of the clavicle, the lateral third of the clavicle. So all of this meaty part is still your upper trap because it goes all the way to the anterior, and it inserts on the clavicle. And, you know, the acromion process, too. The acromion process, remember, like if you have a crow on your shoulder, that's the highest part of your scapula. So it inserts on the anterior part. So this is the trapezius. The serratus anterior looks like a serrated knife. It originates from ribs 1 through 8th or 9th. Some people, it goes all the way to 9. Some people only goes to the 8th rib. It looks like a serrated knife. And this muscle works to deliver a punch with the triceps. And this is the one that gives you the wing scapula. Okay, this is a very important muscle, and it comes across here. The fibers are going this way, okay, like horizontally. And they insert in front of the scapula, anterior to the scapula, on the medial border. This is the medial border of the scapula. This is the lateral border. This is the superior border. This is the inferior border of the scapula. So here's his scapula is right here. And this muscle is all in front of here. So it goes here in front of here, and we just showed here that it goes all the way up here, the insertion. And now we're going to talk about the Pectoralis Minor. Now that he's on the anterior, by the way, this is David. Thank you, David, for helping us out. We really appreciate your muscles and you. So look, here you can see the lateral part, the insertion of the upper trap on the lateral third of the clavicle. And now let's move on to the pec minor. The pec minor is underneath the pec major, and it originates from ribs 3, 4, and 5. This is closest to the midline, closest to the heart, origin, and then insertion. The coracoid process is about an inch below the clavicle, and that is part of the scapula. That's why it moves the scapula, because it inserts into the coracoid process. Now, the coracoid process also has 2 other origins. They're not part of this lesson, but the short head of the biceps and the coracobrachialis originate at the coracoid process, and the pec minor inserts on the coracoid process. This muscle right here is below the pec major, and this muscle here is known as the nerve entrapper, because if this is really tight, if your pecs are really tight, they pull the clavicle down. You have a plexus of 5 nerves, the cervical plexus, which is all the nerves that come through here, even through the scalenes, you know, that they come through here. They can put pressure on those nerves, the musculocutaneous nerve, the axillary nerve, the ulnar nerve, radial nerve, and median nerve. So they can, if their client's arm is going tingling, numb, make sure you check the pec minor. And this is a muscle that moves the scapula. Okay, so those are the 6 muscles: the levator scapulae, the rhomboid minor, major, trapezius, serratus, and pec minor. Those are the 6 muscles that move the scapula. Now, there are 17 muscles that attach to the scapula, but not all of them move the scapula. We'll get into that later. So now let me talk about the movements of the scapula. So you've got elevation. That's what the levator does, is elevates. So that when you do the elevation, that's the levator scapulae and the upper fibers of the levator. These are the agonists, and this is relaxing and lengthening, so these are the antagonists. Now for depression, the lower fibers of the trap are going to pull down, and these are going to relax, so this becomes the antagonist, and this becomes the agonist when it starts pulling down. So that's for, let's see, do elevation again, elevation, and then depression. these muscles are engaged, okay? Now, protraction, like when you're hugging somebody, it's your serratus and your pec minor that bring your arms forward for protraction. Now, what muscles do you think are opposite of that that will retract? It will be retraction, pulling the arms back, will be the rhomboids in the middle fibers of the trap. They're going to pull his arms back. Remember, muscles working opposite, like the biceps. If you have your bicep here, this is the agonist. If you're flexing, and then the antagonist is your triceps. But if you open up that angle, then this becomes the agonist, and this becomes the antagonist. Muscles have to be opposite each other in order to work. Okay, now for upward rotation, when your arms are, the scapula is moving up, that's the upper fibers of the trapezius and the serratus anterior. And for the downward motion, that will be the pec minor and the fibers of the lower trapezius here. So all these muscles work together, they work in groups. So now you have the 6 movements: the elevation, depression, protraction, retraction, upward rotation, and downward rotation. Those are the 6 movements of the scapula and the 6 muscles of the scapula. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Please leave us a comment, share with your friends, with your fellow students, with anybody. We're trying to continue growing the channel and giving you guys what you need, and give me feedback. I appreciate your comments. Until the next time, create a great day.